Hello everyone. This is chapter 27 from my contemporary romance novel Under A Namibian Sky. In this chapter, we learn Luca's dark and painful secret and the reason he reacted the way he did when he overheard Naomi and Kerry's conversation after the desert buggy presentation. By the time Luca and Naomi got to Auntie Elsa's room, she sat propped up against her pillows and had a drip in her arm again. Santina sat beside her on the bed and Kerry on a chair on her other side. Enzo, Johan and the doctor sat on the sofa opposite her bed. Auntie Elsa beckoned for Naomi to sit beside her. Naomi smiled at Luca, let go of his hand and sat down where Auntie Elsa had indicated. Luca pulled up a chair and took his place beside Santina. Although she was smiling weakly, Auntie Elsa was plainly exhausted. Naomi wondered if it was a good idea to have so many people in the room. But before she could say anything, Auntie Elsa, who'd been patting her and Santina's hands on either side of her, turned to Santina. Her voice was a whisper when she spoke. "Remember what we talked about. Now is the time. If not now, you may regret it forever. And life is too short for such regrets and for the deep sadness you've carried in your heart for so long, my dear friend. Now is the time for your courage." At her words, Enzo got up and came to stand between Santina and Luca, his hands on their shoulders, his lovely tenor voice soft and serious. "Yes, I agree. It is time, Santina. We have waited too long." Naomi and the others in the room looked from the Italian trio to Auntie Elsa and back, baffled by the cryptic comments. Luca appeared equally perplexed, but said nothing. Santina, who'd been crying silently at Auntie Elsa's words, dried her tears, sat up straighter, smiled at Enzo over her shoulder, and took Luca's hand. Her eyes found Auntie Elsa's. "You're right, my dear friend. Thank you for giving me the courage to speak finally the words my heart has kept secret for so long." She turned to face Luca. "I hope you will hear me out first, before judging me, and if you judge me, you will not do so too harshly." Enzo, who had remained standing behind them, gave each of their shoulders an encouraging squeeze. "And I pray you will find it in your heart to forgive us all, my son." Santina continued to look at Luca, as though she wanted to will him to understand, even before he'd heard the facts. "Cecilia, your mother was my best friend. Even as a young girl, she was the most beautiful human being I or anyone had ever seen. But despite her beauty, she remained unspoiled. Her beautiful spirit saved her. Everyone was drawn to her like moths to a flame." Luca nodded. He'd seen the pictures of his mother as a child, and as the woman she became. He'd known the model she'd become. She was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen, very different from his beautiful Naomi. Santina continued, encouraged by Luca's nod. "Who could blame Enzo for falling in love with her so quickly? They were only young, and Enzo would have given her anything, and he did. But there was one thing he couldn't give her. As far back as I can remember, Cecilia was obsessed with having children. She would laugh and declare she wanted a football team. When she got pregnant soon after their wedding, she was delirious with joy, as were we all for her. But around 3 months into the pregnancy, she miscarried. She was devastated, and so was Enzo and everyone who loved her. But there were further complications. She wouldn't stop bleeding, and the doctors had to remove her uterus. That meant she'd never be able to have children of her own. It was a cruel fate that such beauty would never be passed on to her children. Cecilia was inconsolable. Nothing I or Enzo said had any effect. I remember how she'd locked herself in their bedroom and cried for days. By this time she was already a fairly well-established model, but she cared not one thing for her modelling career. All our hearts broke for her. When her depression became so severe the doctors were worried she might kill herself. Her family came to stay, I seem to remember. Santina looked at Enzo, who nodded to show she'd remembered their shared past correctly. But nothing her family said made any difference. She wouldn't speak to anyone. She wouldn't eat anything. By the time Enzo had the door removed, they found Cecilia lying in her own filth in her bed. Her eyes were open, and she wasn't crying anymore, but she didn't seem to be able to hear any of us when we spoke to her. Everyone listened intently to Santina's words. A shocked silence pervaded the room as they contemplated the horror of Cecilia's state of mind. Luca, who'd never heard this part of his mother's history, sat still, his face unreadable as he absorbed the events from the past. He'd been angry with his mother for as long as he could remember for walking out of his life like that. Now, he couldn't help thinking no one knew anyone until they'd walked in their shoes. Santina's voice penetrated his thoughts. Her mother found her one evening in the bath. She'd slit her wrists and was bleeding out in the bath. Enzo was beside himself. Thankfully, the ambulance came quickly and the paramedics saved her. But it was an excruciatingly difficult time for everyone, even for me. I hated seeing my best friend going through such pain, and there was nothing I could do to stop her. Enzo squeezed Santina's shoulder encouragingly when it appeared she was finding it too difficult to continue. Santina swallowed her tears. It must have been about a month later when Cecilia finally became well again, enough to get up, clean herself, and eat something. By then, of course, she'd lost a lot of weight. She looked dreadful, and modelling was out of the question. She stayed at home, and even though her mother had stayed behind when the rest of her family returned home, she couldn't help Cecilia back to life. Nor could Enzo. No one could. Every morning, Cecilia would get up and, after breakfast, would spend most of the day sitting in the garden, just staring at nothing. The doctor went to see her often, but he declared there was nothing more he could do for her. He said hopefully she'd recover in time. You had to be patient with her. But Enzo was overwrought. Santina patted Enzo's hand on her shoulder. Tears flowed down his cheeks as he relived those dreadful days through Santina's words. It was then Enzo approached me to ask for my help. Santina kept her eyes fixed on Luca's face, even as he sat with his head bent forward, listening to her story. You must understand, I loved Cecilia like a sister. I would have done anything for her, but she wouldn't respond. That's why Enzo's idea sounded like the perfect solution. He wanted it to be a surprise for her, but decided he needed to get her consent. He tried talking to her for days and days, but she couldn't hear him, or wouldn't. So when he asked for my help, and I saw it was a way to help save my beloved Cecilia, it was an easy thing for me to agree to. I knew it was the way Enzo saw it too. There was never anything more in it than our mutual wish to help Cecilia. Santina sat quietly for a while. It was evident to the others her words had taken a toll on her. She wasn't crying any more, but her voice was very soft, and had changed timbre from too many tears already cried when she continued. After we had the confirmation of your conception, Luca, I was the happiest I could ever remember being. I'd have a baby, and this baby would save the life of my dearest friend in the world. Of course, we didn't tell Cecilia about the pregnancy at first. We wanted to make sure there were no complications, that the baby was healthy, and Cecilia would understand what we had done when the time came, that we'd done it for her. Santina was silent again. It was her turn to look down as she collected her thoughts and her courage to continue the story. After 5 months, when I was showing and Cecilia had put on weight and talked again, albeit sporadically, we told her. It was the worst day of my life. Santina appeared unable to continue. Enzo stroked her shoulder in understanding and encouragement, even as his tears blinded him. But Enzo's touch seemed to give Santina the courage she needed to continue. Santina shifted in her chair, cleared her throat. At first, she just stared at me. Then she stared at Enzo. Then she screamed at us. Santina's tears ran down her cheeks at the memory, still so fresh in her mind. She accused us of having an affair behind her back. She wouldn't listen. She wouldn't understand it wasn't an affair. We'd done what we'd done out of love for her. Instead, she continued to accuse us of not caring about her, not loving her. It hurt us both deeply that she refused to believe our sacrifice for her. She said it was right to end it all this time, and she'd succeed, as she couldn't live with our deception on top of her heartache. Dear God! Santina's hand went up to her mouth as deep sobs racked her body. Naomi got up and offered tissues to Santina and Enzo. Now it made sense that Luca looked so much like Santina. Naomi should have known. With obvious effort, Santina got her emotions under control, but her voice remained full of unshed tears. But in her deranged state, Cecilia became confused. One minute she'd scream at us and threatening suicide, and the next she'd coo around me, touching my bump and congratulating me. Then she'd slump into depressed state again, bemoaning her lot, that she'd never have children. She seemed never to forget that. Santina was silent for a few moments, as she evidently re-experienced the events in her mind's eye. When the baby was born, Cecilia was ecstatic. She seemed to have forgotten she'd thought Enzo and I had had an affair. She accepted the baby as hers. She became besotted with him. But she was never the same again. Her moods and her mind were never stable again. One moment she'd be wonderful, the enigmatic Cecilia we all knew and loved, and the next she'd be full of neuroses, insecurities, paranoia. Throughout Santina's story, Luca had sat still. His face was pale, his eyes dark as he stared at the floor, his hands helpless in his lap. Suddenly he got up. His face was distorted with anger as he stared first at Enzo, then at Santina, his voice a growl when he spoke. That's why she left, isn't it? She couldn't live knowing you two had slept together behind her back. Oh yes, your intentions were supposedly good, but you still did it, didn't you? And you let me believe all these years she'd left because she found some wealthy Greek who could give her a better lifestyle. How could you? You've not only betrayed her, but you've betrayed and lied to me. Lucas stormed out of the room, banging the door behind him. For moments, everyone sat flabbergasted at his outburst, hearing his angry footsteps disappear down the corridor. Then Naomi went to the door, but Enzo's voice stopped her. "No, Naomi, let him go. It's a lot to take in. Allow him to think about it. He's a smart man. He'll see the truth." Meanwhile, Santina couldn't stop crying. Her shoulders shook, and Enzo continued to stroke her shoulder and arm as he took the chair beside her, so suddenly vacated by Luca. Auntie Elsa held Santina's hand, stroking her thumb across it soothingly. "You did well, Santina. I'm so proud of you. I'm glad you got to tell him at last. I'm sure now you'll heal the heartache in your heart." Santina sniffed and nodded. Her sobs stopped. She smiled weakly at Auntie Elsa. "I could only do this today, Elsa, because of you. Your encouragement and the long talks we've had, and yes, you're right. I feel lighter already. Now, I just pray Luca can forgive me." Auntie Elsa returned her smile. "Life is so short. Now Luca knows the truth. I'm sure he'll forgive you and love you like the mother you've always been to him." Auntie Elsa seemed so much weaker, as though Enzo's and Santina's ordeal took its toll on her too. The doctor got up, as did Johan and Kerry. Kerry's eyes looked red with unshed tears, but she said nothing. She went to give Auntie Elsa a quick good-night kiss and squeezed Santina's hand before she and Johan left, followed by Enzo and Santina. The doctor checked Auntie Elsa's pulse and made sure she was comfortable and pain-free. Then he bid the two women good night and left, closing the door behind him. Naomi remained with Auntie Elsa, holding her hand as they waited for sleep to claim her. Once she was sure Auntie Elsa was asleep, Naomi left, shutting the door gently behind her. The next person on the roster would be here soon to take her turn to sit with Auntie Elsa. Satisfied Auntie Elsa was okay, for the moment at least, Naomi's thoughts turned once again to Luca. What a shock Santina's revelations must have been for him. Naomi could understand his reaction completely. She looked for him everywhere, but couldn't find him. Knowing he'd come out of hiding eventually, she went back to her room. The familiarity of the room clutched at her heart. Her life had taken such turns lately, ones she could never have foreseen. As these thoughts ran through her mind, she rummaged through her wardrobe. Among the many dresses Auntie Elsa had gifted her over the past year, Naomi found a comfortable maxi dress to change into. She laid it on the bed while she took off her wedding dress. It might have been Auntie Elsa's, but now it felt like hers. She hung it outside the wardrobe, so she could look at it a little longer before the time came to banish it to its tissue paper and suitcase once again. As she turned back to retrieve the dress she wanted to wear, the haven that was her bed caught her attention. She loved her bed, the best gift ever from Auntie Elsa for her 25th birthday last year. She looked around the room as she changed into the dress. The lovely dusky pink duvet cover and pillowcases that went so well with the grown-up pink walls and the beautiful wallpaper on the accent wall opposite her double bed were her favourites. This room had always been her oasis when things got rough, her castle to retreat to at the end of a long day. It was her little piece of home, where she'd always felt safe. She was grateful for her room, the only one she'd known since moving to Namibia. Auntie Elsa had always allowed her creative freedom to decorate it however she wanted. But regardless of whatever transformation it went through, and there were many, Naomi was proud. She'd always kept her room tidy and the books alphabetically arranged on the bookcase against the wall opposite the window. She'd have to say goodbye to it, as she had to say goodbye to her life before Luca. Would she ever have such a sanctuary again? Sanctuary. That's it! Suddenly she knew where Luca was. Should she go to him? He had a lot to digest. But she didn't want him to feel abandoned. Not again. Didn't she know what that felt like? Her decision made, she hurried down the corridor. When she opened the jet's door, she could feel his presence even before she went inside. Luca was sitting at the back on a sofa, his head in his hands. But he looked up when she walked toward him. His eyes were dark, the hurt naked in them. It nearly made her gasp, but she stifled it and went to sit beside him, sliding an arm around his shoulders. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse. "I'm sorry, amore mio, for my outburst earlier. What must you think of me?" Naomi snuggled into his neck but said nothing. What could she say to take away the hurt she'd seen in his eyes? Suddenly, Luca got up and held out his hand for her to take. "I can't stay here. Let's go." "Where are we going?" "Windhoek. We can stay at the Namibian Sands Hotel. I'm sure they'll have a honeymoon suite there." In the next chapter, we join Luca and Naomi in their honeymoon suite at the Namibian Sands Hotel in Windhoek. Needless to say, the chapter contains heat. Thank you for listening, thank you for watching, thank you for liking and sharing my videos, and most of all, thank you so much for subscribing to my channel. It means the world. Until next time.